Welcome to Career and Leadership Real Talk, the no-nonsense guide for ambitious managers who want to have more impact and progress their career. I'm Pamela Langan, a job search coach and expert CV writer specialising in helping frustrated professionals land the jobs and pay rises they know they deserve.
And I'm Jackie Jagger, a leadership and mindset coach specialising in helping newly promoted and new to role leaders to avoid the dickhead trap and lead with confidence. Between us, we've helped hundreds of leaders and managers to find new roles, take ownership of their careers, and handle the challenges that job searches and leadership responsibility inevitably bring. And now we're joining forces to share with you what we know has worked for our clients.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode. Today, we are talking about imposter syndrome and why it gets worse the more senior you become. And this has come up lots of times within Jackie's coaching work. And this is something that we talk quite a lot about generally. And when we're thinking about imposter syndrome and how it affects senior leaders, it's those people who are expected to feel more confident as they progress. But instead, as they do progress, they find imposter syndrome is hitting them harder than ever. And there's actually a reason for that. And it's not what most people expect. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask Jackie to give us the lowdown on this, because this is an area of expertise for Jackie. And this is something that she helps a lot of people with. So Jackie, tell us why this is such an issue.
So what often happens is that people feel like when they are going to get a more senior opportunity, that when their career progresses, they will become more confident. That if they work harder, that if they deliver to a high standard, that if they meet all their goals and objectives, that will prove themselves to be better. And therefore, their imposter syndrome and that mind monkey voice in their head will start to leave them alone and will be proved wrong. And what they actually find is that the more senior they become, what happens is there are more situations where they feel exposed, there is more uncertainty, there is more doubt about, do I belong here? Am I in the right place? Can I do this? Am I good enough? So where people are expected that as they progress, they're getting better, they're improving, they're learning, their experience is growing, and they're going to be okay, it can be quite uncomfortable to then realise my monkeys have come with me and they are now going full force and making themselves very unpleasantly known to an even greater degree than they used to.
Yeah, and that's the funny thing, isn't it? Because you think as you move through each role or as you start a new role, that you can leave that stuff behind and start fresh and feel yourself into that new role. I see this with my clients as well. If you take the baggage into the next role and you don't deal with it, if you don't face it head on, if you don't understand where these feelings of imposter syndrome are coming from, you will just constantly go round in that same circle, won't you? And it almost becomes a vicious circle, because usually it's super simple, isn't it, to figure out where it's coming from and fix it. But if you never do that, you'll just keep going around in that same cycle and basically sabotaging your progress.
Yeah, and I think it's natural to want to not feel self-doubt. But the reality is, the more senior you get, the more you are going to have good strategies to handle it and to perform with it, because it's not going to get easier. It's not going to go away. So what you've got to do is recognize, and like you say, be able to leave baggage behind, be able to move on. And that doesn't just come from working harder, which is the very typical way that people that experience imposter syndrome try and outwork it. They try and prove themselves by going a million miles an hour in order to deliver the goods. And that then leaves them burnt out. It means that then they've set a standard that's so high that to reach it or exceed it in the next level of role, that they've got to work even harder. And then where's that capacity going to come from? So yeah, it's that being able to understand it, work with it, and manage it is so crucial, and becomes even more crucial the more ambitious you are and the more that you want to be able to further your career. Because if you are experiencing it at mid-level, it's going to be heightened the further you go.
Yeah, and it's interesting, isn't it, that the seniority does make it worse and not better, because you always think the opposite is true. But one of the things that we were talking about when we were planning this episode was about your brain using past evidence to self-regulate. And I thought that was a really interesting point, because everything that you've ever done is stored in your brain, all of the experiences and all of the good stuff, all of the bad stuff. And I suppose when you get yourself into that vicious circle of feeling like an imposter, this how do you self-regulate? How do you get past that?
And I think this is quite fundamental to this, because we've talked before about the difference between confidence and self-belief. And confidence comes from evidence. So that's that part that you're describing of your brain using that evidence can keep it calm, can give you that reassurance. If you've done something before, if you know that you are capable because of the evidence that it's gone previously, then your brain doesn't need you to self-regulate, because you will naturally feel that situational confidence. The problem is when you go into a more senior role, there is a lack of that evidence, because the things that you were good at, the things that you've done before, then are being done by the people that report to you, and your role shifts and changes. You are going into new things, unfamiliar territory. Things are much more visible typically, they're higher stakes. And all of this combined with you haven't done this before, your brain does tend towards that panic spiral. So it's really important to understand why some of this stuff is happening, because I think just normalizing it and understanding that there's a reason behind it is actually part of the way to tackle it. It's part of that first step of going, yeah, it's okay that I don't feel 100% confident in this situation because I haven't done it before. It's not because I can't ever be capable. It's because this is new, or it's because the stakes are high. So I think it's really important to normalize that experience and for people to know that they're not alone, and that there is good reason why your brain doesn't have the evidence that you're capable in this particular context.
Yeah, and I think that's so interesting, isn't it? Because where you're talking about there, if you've not done it before, of course you're going to feel something about it because you've not done it before, and there's a whole range of thoughts and feelings that you might have around that. But then also the other side of that is where you have done it before and maybe it didn't go right, or you didn't fully understand how to execute it that time, and you just buried it away in a little box and thought, well, I hope that never comes up again. And then when it shows up again, you're like, oh, how do I deal with this? And I suppose that links in with navigating uncertainty and ambiguity, because I think as a leader, as a senior leader particularly, the expectation is that you can navigate uncertainty. But if that's something that you struggle with, then that's going to be really difficult, isn't it?
It is. And if I give an example that has come up numerous times for different clients of mine, board meetings. So when you get to a certain level and you are going into your first board meeting and participating, and you're expected to present a paper, what have you, that situation, when you haven't done that before, feels terrifying. Compounded by you're typically in a room with people who've been doing this every month or every quarter for however long. So you're comparing your very first time where you don't know what are the dynamics in this room, how are people expected to present, how long are people expected to present for, what bits of the paper are they supposed to talk through, and you're comparing that with other people around the room who potentially have been doing this for forever. So, of course, they're going to feel confident because for them, that situation doesn't have the same uncertainty that it does for you. And then typically what happens with my clients is the first time we will be thinking through who is the audience, what are going to be the key points, how can you get some of that certainty. So who can you talk to about the typical format? Can you have permission to sit and observe one before you're expected to contribute? So there's ways that you can start to de-risk and make that situation a little bit less uncertain, but also acknowledging that part of navigating uncertainty is experiencing it and making decisions in the moment and then reviewing how it went. So first time that they do it, typically that experience is terrifying. 6 months later, when we're talking about a board meeting, they'll reflect back and realize, oh, that thing used to be terrifying, and actually now I'm the same as the people that I was looking at and thinking, how are they so polished? Because now that's my new normal. And it's only by going through that experience and navigating it that you've got out the other side. And then you look back and realize, maybe I can manage to handle it. It's just that when I'm here and facing it, it looks terrifying. But when I'm through it and looking back, it doesn't seem such a big deal after all.
Yeah, and it's interesting that, isn't it? Because I think there's so many times we don't allow ourselves growth process. We don't allow ourselves to grow within those things. We just think this is the expectation and this is what I need to do. And we don't think, how can we learn from this? What can we learn? How can we grow? We just want to skip that growth process and just be like, I know how to do it. So I feel comfortable and I'm ready to go. But you miss out on the journey. And I always feel like it's the journey that makes you stronger, that really gives you that strong foundation. And I suppose this links in quite nicely with the identity gap, doesn't it? Because it's that lag between how others already experience you and how you experience yourself. I think that's really key, isn't it? Because we spend so much time feeling like, if we're feeling like an imposter, like almost feeling down on ourselves, like we're not good enough and all of the rest of it. But it's, do we ever stop to think, how are other people experiencing us? And how does that differ from how we feel about ourselves?
Absolutely. The identity gap is something that I talk about so often to clients that are going through this, because what that is, you are being stretched. You are, like you say, in that phase of growth. And what happens is when you're in that phase of growth, your external reality has changed quite significantly, typically in a short space of time. So you've stepped into a more senior role, you've gone into an unfamiliar situation, and that external experience literally goes from here to here in the blink of an eye. But your internal reality isn't quite prepared for that. And so how you see yourself is unprepared, not ready. And that's part of what prompts all these questions of, am I good enough? Will I ever be able to do it? Am I just bitten off more than I can chew? Because it does take time. Your internal identity doesn't flip a switch and go from here to here. And that's part of when I'm talking to people who are in the preparation phase for a new role and for more senior opportunities. That's a part of what I talk to people about is, where do you want your identity to get to? What do you want people to say about your leadership that they might not say yet? And so we can then be intentional about, how do you start to build that leadership identity? But most people haven't done that work. And even if you have, you can't always anticipate, and that identity doesn't shift immediately. So I think there's a real element of having kindness and compassion for yourself that people find really difficult. And you've got to just acknowledge and allow that your internal identity is going to take time to catch up with the external reality.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. And I think that probably leads us quite nicely into the self-judgment cycle, because we are so quick, aren't we, to judge ourselves in probably more negative situations, but we're just so quick, aren't we, to jump on our own backs and be like, you've done that wrong, you shouldn't have said that in that way, and then have all of these feelings around the situation. And we really beat ourselves up. And a lot of the time it's unnecessary because, as we say, it's part of the growth phase or the growth process. But we really do beat ourselves up, don't we?
Absolutely. And Claire Yoser, who wrote a book called Ditching Imposter Syndrome, which I would definitely recommend for people that are experiencing imposter syndrome, I remember she framed it in a way that I love, which is imposter syndrome is when you fear that people will judge you the way that you secretly judge yourself. And this pattern is almost, I can get ahead of the game. If I judge myself more harshly than others judge me, then I can use that as a motivator to make me have high standards and work hard. If I judge myself, I can anticipate where others might attack me and I can build the wall to protect myself from that attack. And it feels like that's a logical strategy. If I'm harsh with myself, then I'm going to make myself grow. But being harsh with yourself actually does the opposite. It shuts down growth because what you're doing is activating this protection mechanism rather than activating that aim of, I'm going to improve here. I'm going to acknowledge that the first time I do it won't go perfectly, but the second time will hopefully go a bit better. And if it doesn't, then I can learn from that and I can trust myself to be able to learn. So when you judge yourself, it feels like you're doing that with your own growth and best interests at heart, but it doesn't. It's the opposite. And we did the podcast episode on the 5 mindsets that successful leaders have. And one of those was that you've got to embrace being a work in progress. You've got to acknowledge that you are not the finished article. And if you want to be stronger and better, it's not about trying to prove you're the finished article. It's about embracing that process of growth. And when you judge yourself, you shut that down straight away.
Yeah, that's an interesting one, isn't it? Are we ever the finished article? I just don't think we ever are. And we're always striving to be the finished article, aren't we? And I suppose we just miss out on that learning and that journey along the way. So, what does actually help people in this situation?
So, from a practical perspective, first of all, don't try and close this with logic. It's an emotional experience and trying to apply a framework. So, what people will typically do is try and find tools, techniques, frameworks. So, they will, for example, think about going on a communication course to be able to communicate more confidently. They will, like I say, work harder and try and deliver more. And those tools and frameworks and overworking don't make the difference. So, what you need to do here is to, first of all, understand and be able to notice when the imposter is triggered, when those mind monkeys are loud, and what are they saying? How are they making their presence felt? And you've got to then create a mindful practice of reducing self-judgment. Because if imposter syndrome is the fear that people will secretly judge you the way you judge yourself, then if you don't secretly judge yourself, then that stops because you've taken away half of the equation. You've got to learn to notice what are these things that you are secretly saying to yourself, when do they come up? And you've then got to mindfully practice starting to reduce that self-judgment. And I will often say to people who have kids, because a lot of my leadership clients have relatively young kids, would you speak to your kids the way that you speak to yourself? And they're like, oh, no, it's horrifying. I would never be that mean to my children. And if you wouldn't be that mean to somebody else that you love and care about and have the greatest of regard for, if it's not good enough for speaking to other people, it's not good enough for speaking to yourself. So noticing it is the first step, and noticing those ways that you speak to yourself, and then considering, okay, if that were my child, how would I speak to them in that situation? And typically, it's I wouldn't be critical, I would be encouraging. I would reassure them that it's okay to do it and experiencing it and be scared. They've just got to go through it. I would give them the reassurance that do it, and if it goes badly, you learn from it. So it's moving from being your own worst critic to an encourager with high standards. So you're not saying it's okay to be terrible, but an encourager who is saying focus on the growth. And a client recently said, which I absolutely loved, I've realized that when I'm in fear, I'm in growth. So that can be really helpful as well, is acknowledging that when you're feeling fearful, that's a sign of growth. And when you're feeling comfortable, that's a sign that, okay, I feel comfortable, but I'm not growing here.
Yeah, I love that way of looking at it because that's so true, isn't it? Because when you're in that comfort zone, it's like that's where you might start getting bored, where you kind of, yeah, you get a little bit complacent. But when you're feeling that fear, is usually a time where you're uncomfortable because you are learning and growing. So I love that. And it's a good reminder, isn't it, as well, that it's if we're feeling fearful, if the imposters popping in on a daily basis. What am I learning here? How am I growing? What support do I need? I think it's a great way to think about it. So is there anything else that people can do to start working with this and moving past it?
I think another one that I would pinpoint would be to really notice with external feedback. So typically, when people experience imposter syndrome, part of what that does is prevents them internalizing positive external feedback. They assign it to they're just being nice. They don't really think that they were just being nice. First of all, positive feedback doesn't tend to happen because people are just being nice. They would say nothing at all. People don't tend to say, well done, you did a great job, when they don't think that, because it's an effort to give positive feedback. And most of what I hear from people is that they don't get much positive feedback. But what I think can make it harder to internalize is that a lot of positive feedback is quite general. And as regular listeners will know, we love a bit of specificity. So part of what can help to enable you to internalize positive feedback is to be curious about what was the specific there. So if somebody tells you that you've done a great job, then first of all, thank them for that positive feedback and try and quash that need to just sweep it under the carpet and assume they're being nice. But part of how you can do that is to ask specific questions. Thanks, I really appreciate you telling me that. Do you mind giving me examples of specifically what you thought I did well? Or can you tell me what prompted you to think that I did well? Because if you've got specifics of, I thought you came across as really relaxed, for example, that was a recent example for a client of mine where their manager had given them some positive feedback, was you looked really relaxed. And my client I was not in the least relaxed in that circumstance. But what that told them is that they were able, even when internally, in their own words, I felt like I was dying and I considered faking passing out to get away from that situation. So that's how unrelaxed they were. But even in that, they were able to generate an impression externally of being relaxed. So that, I think, then can enable them to recognize that maybe others are experiencing me differently than I'm internally feeling in that moment. But part of that comes from getting the specifics. What did you think I did well? What makes you say that situation went well? So, yeah, notice the positive, interrogate it, understand it, get more specific about where this positive feedback is coming from, rather than assuming people are just being nice, because people don't take time out of their day. They just don't say anything at all if they think it went horribly wrong.
And I think that's really important because I think when we're feeling like that and somebody does give us positive feedback, it doesn't feel right. It never seems to land right. You tend to lean into that element of doubt, don't you? Rather than thinking, wow, I must have done a good job or that must have gone well. Because like you say, people don't go out of the way to give positive feedback. They just not give any feedback. And when you think about how often you do get feedback generally, people are generally quite tight with feedback, aren't they? And I suppose just listening to you there, another good thing would be to borrow that belief from the people that are already showing it in you. So, you know, that could be a really good way, couldn't it, of getting rid of those doubts and just seeing it from that person or seeing you from that person's perspective.
100%. I remember years ago, a member of my team who was probably 3, 4 months in was finding it really tough. And I remember her asking me the question, "Do you think I can do this?" And I said, "Yes, I've chosen you for this role for a reason. I believe that you can get there. I know it feels hard at the moment, but you 100% have my backing." And that was literally the word she replied with. "Okay, if you're telling me that, I'm going to borrow your belief in me then." And we're so quick to absorb any signs of doubt or criticism from other people. So be intentional about who does believe in you, who thinks that you can do this, and choose to believe them. If you're going to choose to believe somebody, why not believe the people who believe in you rather than choosing to absorb criticism or doubt? So look for the people who believe in you. And often when you do that, there's quite a lot of them.
Wow, I just felt all of the emotion from that then, because what a position to be in where she can borrow your belief and start working towards what she needs to do, because it's so hard, isn't it, when you're feeling like you're really lacking that belief in yourself and you're wondering, can I do it? Is it possible? Will I get found out? When you're going through all of those thoughts and feelings, it's so tough. And then to have that person or those people that say, I believe in you and know you can do it. Wow. That's so powerful, isn't it? And if you're listening to this today and it resonates with you and you're thinking, I could do with some support, or even just starting to think this week about where the self judgment kicks in for you and the moments where you feel most exposed or out of your depth, and really start thinking about those moments. And if you are looking at navigating a step up or you want some support with this, then get in touch and Jackie can tell you all about the coaching options that she has on offer. And some of the results that we've seen lately are just unreal, aren't they? So yeah, so if you are feeling like that, or you know somebody that is, please share this episode with them. And don't forget to rate and review us on all of your favorite podcast platforms. And we'll be back with another episode.